says I am recording. Oh, okay, maybe.
Session is now being recorded. We are live.
Live, okay. So we'll just take a few minutes now to kind of introduce, and to you, I don't know how many of you, Dr. Armstrong, and I think some of you may have Dr. Ash, and there's two sections of ORGL 600 being offered this session, and Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Ash are the teachers, and I have taught the course in the past, and I will teach it in the future, but I'm the designer of the course. So a lot of the design elements, the assignments, I've interacted with Dr. Armstrong quite a bit, actually, because he's taught this for a number of years. But a lot of whatever is not working is my fault, and whatever good things are happening, I'm sure, are both his and Dr. Ash's what they're doing. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to talk a little bit about why we chose Pedagogy of the Oppressed as the first book. Some of you may have been jumping into it a little bit and realizing that it's a difficult read. It's actually translated, the English you have is a translation from the original Portuguese. Dr. Armstrong and I debated whether we should just have the original Portuguese book if we were trying to be faithful to Prairie, but just kidding. And so it is a difficult book to read because it's a translation, but also because Prairie's ideas are very kind of packed. There's a lot of depth to things. When I first read Prairie years and years ago, I remember reading sometimes the same page over and over again a few times before I finally really let it sink in. What I've done here is I've put out some of the quotes that really struck me, and you probably have the same experience as you're reading it. There's some stuff you go, well, I'm not quite sure, what does that mean, what does it mean? And then all of a sudden they'll say something and it'll be like, whoa, wow, that's pretty profound. And so that's one of the ways graduate students read books is, you know, the old days when you used to sit down with a novel on the beach and do a little reading for entertainment. That's way behind you now. At this point, you're going to be reading books that are given to you by other people. And a lot of times graduate students begin to learn how to move through a lot of reading by trying to really get at the key things. So sometimes you move faster than you might if you were just reading the book and you had no pressures on you. So Dr. Armstrong, you want to add anything to that from your experience as a graduate student?
Yeah, I mean, after years of having students struggle with this text, my encouragement always is to keep with it, just because I do feel like it ends up becoming some students' favorite text in our whole program, and they're referencing it 5, 6 classes later, and others maybe use it as a nice doorstop. So I get it. Maybe it doesn't connect with all students. However, there's so many valuable things that once you start to understand what Prairie is trying to do, you will begin to see it in the world, in systems, in our organizations, in our politics, and for those reasons, it's really important for us to be able to spend some time, and particularly framed in this module of what don't I want as a leader. We get to see the oppression both in our systems, but also in ourselves, in the way that our own privilege allows us to oppress others.
And we'll give you a chance, all of you, to ask some questions. You can type chat questions, and both Josh and I will try to keep our eye to those kind of questions. But, you know, part of the idea behind, as Dr. Armstrong mentions, is the course is set up, and it's grounded in the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola. And those of you who know who the Jesuits are know that Ignatius is the founder of the Jesuits, like almost 500 years ago, long time ago, and he's still a very key person to the Jesuits. In other words, he's not sort of a plastic saint that sort of founded this religious order. He's really somebody that had some tremendous insights into psychologically how people change and transform the way they think. And so that's part of the reason, I mean, that is the reason why we've chosen to start this course and, in that sense, start this curriculum on leadership studies that all of you have entered into. What we're really trying to do is follow that lead of Ignatius of Loyola, and he said, well, okay, what you want to do at the beginning, before you start trying to figure out what it is you want to be as a leader, you need to get a really good grip, almost visceral feeling about what it is you don't want to be like as a leader. And so part of the Prairie book for me is when I first read it as a graduate student, I remember thinking, I started thinking about how many people that I had known in my life, personally and professionally, seemed to be oppressors toward me. And then as I kept reading it and thinking about it, I began to realize how I'm an oppressor, how I, and in some ways, even though I try to help other people, often I try to help people on my terms. I want to have them be better people by my definition. And so what Prairie's, I think, really, really helpful for is, it would be one thing to have this oppressor who's this brute who's just, a clear caricature of an evil person. What if the person is not that? Maybe the leader is unconsciously or consciously manipulative and wants you to be a certain way because that's what they think is best. That's a very dangerous kind of thing for a leader, and so all the more reason in kind of the way that Ignatius, I think, meant it is we're starting the 8-week session trying to say, okay, really think about what is it that you don't want from leadership? What is it you don't want from your leadership? What is it that, and get a little deeper, start thinking about how I don't like it when I'm controlled. I don't like it when someone tells me what to do. I try not to do that in my life. And then think and a little more and think, but do I do that? So really the purpose of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, however difficult it may be to read, is really to challenge some of our assumptions that we really are doing good by the work that we do. It's not to say that you're somehow a bad leader, but it's just to make you really reflective on why you do the things you do as a leader, why you choose to have a certain agenda in your organization or in your community. Dr. Armstrong, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say, another place that it resonates with the kind of education that we offer here at Gonzaga is that one easy theme that you've probably picked up on if you've been reading through Prairie is this idea of problem-posing education. So rooted in dialogue, and in many ways rooted in reflection. So it takes a reflective faculty member, teacher, educator to be able to reflect on what your students need, provide reflection and action, and that's such an important part of what we do in the classroom at Gonzaga and even online in our courses, is provide these reflective spaces. We often talk to our students about how do we get onto the balcony in this moment? How do we stay present with what's going on, but take another balcony perspective to get some insights about what's going on? That really is, it gives up some authority. I think, higher education, academia is built on these ideas that some people have more important ideas than others. Often those are people who have lots of initials behind their name, and we get to be called Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Carey. And yet we're setting up a classroom where we're saying, certainly we have some knowledge and truth, but so do you. Very important knowledge and truth that we can create together through dialogue, through reflection. And I love that connection with the Jesuit tradition in that way. And I think it even hits me in a place in terms of the kind of collaborative leadership that I want to be a part of and even follow.
And this is a as Dr. Armstrong mentions, I think this is also for some of you maybe the first time that you've encountered anything Jesuit. But you know, Gonzaga University is a Jesuit university. I'm sure that's why our basketball team does so well. But what this is really doing is introducing you to something that is very important to all of the educators at Gonzaga University. You know, one of the nice things about Gonzaga as a learning community is the mission isn't just something we kind of put on the shelf and we just say, oh, well, that's it. I mean, you know, faculty throughout the campus, undergraduate faculty, graduate faculty, really take that seriously. And so we're excited to be able to share what we see as the heart of the transformative dynamics that Ignatius of Loyola sort of created from his own experience of transformation, and then to apply it to education. And hopefully you can see that, or you will see as you go through, Gonzaga University as a Jesuit university is not about being Catholic. It's not even about being Christian. It's not about even being in a faith tradition. It's about being fully engaged with the world. And by being fully engaged with the world, you open yourself up to the truth, as Dr. Armstrong was saying. And I think that's really what we want from all of you, is we want you to grapple with really what's the truth of your situation that you experience, and what's the truth of how you should respond to that. And the starting point is, what is it that you are afraid of in others and in yourself in terms of getting it wrong? And that's what is it that you don't want. We're going to move on into later modules in the course to what do you want, and so that's an opportunity for you to really try to, almost in an ideal sense, figure out what it is that motivates you, what gives you life as a person and as a leader. And then we're going to look in later, the third module, and try to say, well, and what does that mean? What's the cost of that? What's the price you have to pay to be effective, to be the leader you want to be? And then we're going to even go farther at by the end in the fourth module to really look at, and you know, how much more do I need to grow? How much more is there to learn, really? So it's a really, this particular book will probably be the most difficult read of this course, but I think if you can bring with it an attitude of, you know, let me try to challenge myself in terms of my thinking about what's me. I think what you'll find is the other books will all begin to fit into place as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think I saw Sam Armstrong's at least posted on here, so maybe she could get her camera.
So apparently I can't get anything to work, so I just failed and called in. This is the day that my computer decided to die.
All right.
So I am here, though. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sam.
We've got about, looks like we've got about 8 students from both of your classes, and we are recording it, just so you know that, Sam. And what Josh and I have done is just kind of give an overview of why we chose Prairie. Now, Prairie, it's just a little more background on Prairie, just so you know. I mean, it's an older book. I mean, it was published in I think 1970. Prairie is what I would call in educational circles a classic work, because it really gets at the idea of what education is about. And the old model is really somebody standing up in front of people, lecturing them, you know, instilling in them their truth so that they can kind of give it back to them on a test. And what Prairie is really trying to do is say, well, maybe that's not what people want. Maybe that's not even what people need. One of the stories about Prairie that I liked when I first read his book and was reading a little about the background is he, you know, held out this, what they were doing is trying to teach illiterate farmers to be able to read, and so he was hired by the government to do that. So he went in there, and they had like little flashcards kind of things, and so they were using that. And then there was a government policy that they should, that the farmers were all drinking too much, and they weren't, they were kind of not working to their full capacity. They were, getting completely wasted in the evening and then not working to their full capacity the next day. So Prairie was told to also then teach them how to not be alcoholics. Teach them that it was a crime or a terrible waste for them to be drinking all the time. So he held the government issued a placard of him, and it was a picture of this very fine, upstanding, nicely dressed person standing on a street corner, looking at a drunken, obviously peasant farmer, different clothes, kind of drunk and kind of disordered and stuff. And they said, okay, what do you see in this picture? And so the expectation of the government, of course, was that people would say, well, I feel ashamed. I'm that person in the middle of the street just looking disorderly, and I wish I was like that guy standing on the corner there that is so fine and upstanding. What Prairie heard instead, he had, well, what I see is a good-for-nothing person standing on the corner who doesn't care about anything and gets everything given to him. And I see this poor guy who is overwhelmed by work, can't feed his family, can't, give his children what they need, and he's just about at his wit's end. And so he's drinking to the point where he can't take it anymore. And at that point, Prairie thought, whoa, this is not what the government was expecting people to get out of that picture. Maybe what I need to do is ask them, instead of saying, this is what you should see in that picture, maybe I need to ask them, what do you see in this picture? So instead of it being like a teacher lecturing in front of the classroom, it's like a teacher, as Prairie will talk about later in the book, the teacher becoming a participant with the students in trying to understand what the truth of the situation is. And now we actually have visual spotting of Dr. Ash, who's here with us. Good to see you.
It's a rare sighting.
Samantha?
It's a rare sighting.
Want to add any of your thoughts for the group that's here?
No, I mean, I think, I'm jumping in knowing that you've already kind of covered some of this, but what you just said, I think is so important for people to keep in mind, because all of us have come up through educational systems and institutions and organizations that have pieces of a sage on stage versus shared learning, and going to more of a shared learning model where an educator or an instructor is right there with you and engaging and sharing back and forth and kind of having this flow of information, instead of the only expert and the only one that has this knowledge, is new and an adjustment for a lot of people. So I think, some of the things, besides getting adjusted to a graduate level course, besides getting adjusted to this curriculum and a hard read for the initial read, is also getting adjusted to a system where there's shared learning going on in that environment, because that may not have been people's educational background of, we come, we dialogue, and there is some guidance, but going back and forth. And I think that's where starting with Prairie is so critical and so important, because it lays the foundation of what this program is about, in creating a space where there is that flow back and forth of knowledge and learning.
I have another anecdote to share, Mike. When you shared your story, I was brought back to, the first time I read Prairie was in graduate school at the University of Vermont, and it was really under this classic read for educational philosophy, and I would say certainly shaped my own thinking about teaching. But I would say more recently, you know, another love of my life, which has been taking students to Zambia, we get to see this lived out. And in the 4 or 5 week summer courses in Zambia, we usually take about 16 undergrads, and we're really trying to practice this idea of accompaniment. How do you come alongside? How do you empower? How do you not show up to a community having you know, answers to problems that you don't really understand? And we've been practicing this for years, and yet it was maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had a group of engineering students who were there, who, as part of one of their community projects, they were building a better stove with Zambians. So we had Zambian students who were in this engineering class. We were using locally sourced products to make a new stove. And the Zambians said, boy, we need to take another try at this. We need some more materials. So I get the Gonzaga students in the vehicle, we drive away, we get some new bricks, we come back, and the Zambians themselves had taken some of the education we gave them and built an even better stove without us there. Now, isn't that what you would want in terms of sort of that problem-solving education? Not a chance for us to sort of make these deposits and think that we've now we've got this figured out, but to hand it over to the people who actually spend their life over an African stove to say, how do you make this better? And it's that sort of transition of an educational environment, this idea of coming alongside, and how does accompaniment happen when we're working at Boeing or on teams here and other ways. So Prairie certainly influences my thinking and real lived experience in those moments as well.
That's great. That's a great example of that. I'm going to open it up to questions from those of you who are participating with us this afternoon or this evening. One last thing I would just like to say, you know, when you're reading Prairie, notice that, you know, what I've got is, it's like I've put on this thing all these different quotes from Prairie that just struck me, right? And you don't have to read the entire book before you can make a comment or before you can share a reflection on that. Any one of these paragraphs is rich in ideas that can be very, they can trigger a lot of thinking, they can challenge you, they can remind you of experiences that illustrate them. So as you're reading Prairie, don't feel like you have to read the whole book, or you have to perfectly understand it before you can make a comment. That's, you know, that's what this, as both Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Ash have been saying, is that's why this book is here, and all the books are here, is to trigger your own experience, to bubble up and to put some flesh on the skeleton that these books represent. So don't wait, you know, jump in. Say, here's what he said in this paragraph here. Here's how I have experienced this. Or here's how I have not experienced it. I don't think he's right here. That's okay to say. That's part of what graduate education is and the key is, if you don't agree with either the teacher or the text or any other student, what you do is you explain why. You have evidence that supports why you agree or why you disagree. That's what makes graduate education different than talk radio. So hopefully this will be an experience that you'll have throughout the curriculum.
One, I think, Mike, I feel a collective sigh of relief for students who now are thinking, like, good, I don't have to have Prairie figured out before we can at least engage about that. Because it is, I mean, you know, 10 years of teaching this class, and I'm still finding things. I'm like, wow, I wonder what he means by that. I don't know how I make sense of that. So yes, please think about that. And then two, I often say this in my classes on campus and try to do it online as well, but we value the voice of dissent. I think the idea that we can disagree and sometimes agree to disagree and do that respectfully under the guise of a dialogue is really what we're looking for here. And so there is some nuance about doing that. How do I disagree with Mike Carey's thought around this in a way that fully understands his argument and yet chooses a different position? And I think we can do that with all the authors that we're spending time with in this course. And there may be things that with Prairie's experience that you don't resonate with, maybe more understanding and disagreement, and others can help you understand that a little bit more, maybe even own that. So,
right.
Well, and I think to build off what Dr. Armstrong's mentioned is there's this piece of that's really what leadership needs, right? It needs both I understand it and I agree with it, and I'm not fully on board with this. Here's why. Here's my logic behind it. Here's my ability to disagree in a civil discourse type of manner. And I think when we see leaders really flourish and organizations flourish, it's a result of leaders having mastered the skill to be able to interrogate reality and launch themselves into the conversation, right? Come out behind yourself into the conversation and really talk about where you're seeing some struggles and have some dissenting viewpoints. I think, you know, in some leadership scenarios, truthfully being, you know, part of a team player, part of helping an organization really excel, a volunteer group really excel, is a result of critical thinking about the material that you're engaging with.
Great. So after your three teachers have told you that we don't like to lecture in front of people, we've now lectured for 30 minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it over to you and allow you to ask questions that come out of either your reading of Prairie or just questions about how to use this in your learning experience that you're in the middle of in Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Ash's class. So if you want, you can use your audio and unmute it and ask the question, or you can use just type chat and I'll try to repeat them for people.
Can they even use their video if they turn that camera on, if people have that? Or
yeah, we should be able to handle, I think we could handle up to, we only have 12 people and we have up to 26 people that can tax this system. Any questions, any observations, any Prairian points? Your crickets.
I think, oh,
Alberto.
got a question coming.
okay.
All right, I'll just unmute. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. This is more of a class question. I'm wondering, when I was reading not the intro, is it the introduction? Maybe the foreword. The person who's not Freire posited something that I kind of disagreed with. He mentions that the then call for a language of simplicity and clarity represents yet another mechanism to dismiss the complexity of heretical issues. And I kind of agree, because I find Freire to be digestible, although a little bit difficult to read. But I found the introduction to be even more difficult to read than Freire himself, just because it was filled with academic jargon and words that even I had to look up. And I enjoy big words, but this was almost a little bit excessive. How do we feel about the notion that Freire's work has to be complicated and complex by default in order to be valid for people to be able to experience and analyze?
So I'll start. Part of it is a language thing. It's it's translated, and so that's imagine what it was like in Portuguese. And part of it is he's trained as in philosophy as well as education. So philosophers, that's how they work. And you're right about the academic ease. I think the three of us are with you on why can't we just say it more straightforwardly. But it is what it is, and many of the kind of classic theorists are going to be writing in that kind of style. So it's sort of like what would be the ideal is you read it and then you say, okay, let me see if I get what you're saying here. Let me re-say it so that it makes more sense to me and maybe to other people as well. Josh and Sam, your ideas?
Yeah, my first thought is that Prairie at least his ideas would probably hate the fact that like the common person couldn't access them, because that's sort of what he's looking for. And I've really even loved seeing, I think in two places, both in Zambia in the community and in East LA, some work with Father Greg Boyle and Homeboy Industries. Both of them have built some communities around some of these very teachings, having small groups that end up being advocates for their own communities. So you think about a place like East LA, which at one time was very gang-ridden, and we could imagine that one solution would be all these policy changes, you know, getting guns off the streets, more government intervention, and yet what really did it was small communities of mostly Hispanic women who took back their own streets and organized in a way to sort of think about what is the oppressor doing to us? How do we educate our own? How do we feel empowered in that? I'm not certain that any of them actually read Paulo Freire, and yet the philosophies behind that certainly influenced the Jesuits in introducing that to those communities in the ways that they're actually living out what he's talking about in terms of the role of oppression within our world. So does that bring up anything else for you, Sam?
I think that, you know, one of the things that I think about is in all writing and all research and thought that we put out there is, you know, what audience are we trying to get at to either influence or change or and I do wonder with Freire's work. I mean, I think there's a piece of it, the translation. I think there's a piece of, you know, when he was an academic in a different time a little bit, and I think there's also a piece of I do think that his work, he would be frustrated that it's not just accessible to the common person that's not in academics, that's not, you know, they can't just pick it up and go, okay, I totally get this. It's not as straightforward as I think he wanted. But I also really feel like he was partially really writing that towards a group of people that were in oppressor positions and trying to get them to understand that that is not necessarily what we want, right? So if we think about even when we use it in K through 12 education classes in college to try to get educators to start to think about, like, this isn't what we want. I still don't necessarily think it's the most accessible version that we could have of the concepts that he puts forth, but I think that part of his audience really is that academician, or the what he would have, and that may be the flaw even in his own text, right? Like, who is he really trying to reach with, like, we need you to be part of this movement of going, you know, recognizing these things. And so I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, Dr. Carey has probably spent a lot more time over the years with the text. I know Josh has spent a lot of time teaching this program and with the text, and I definitely have had the text with me for a long time, but is there, I mean, do you feel like I'm off base there as one of your fellow faculty members, that a piece of what's going on is that he's trying to also talk to people that think that they are, you know, at the top of their game?
No, I agree. I think he is writing for the elite. He's writing for the teachers of his time. He's using the language of the people who normally will use their gifts to unconsciously oppress the people that they're serving. So yeah, I would agree, and I think part of the, you know, it is it's a difficult read, but it's, and the way I would look at it is, it's a classic text. In other words, part of the reason Dr. Armstrong said earlier, you know, students at the end of their curriculum experience at Gonzaga in organizational leadership and communication leadership studies, we'll ask them, well, what are some of the books that you remember? What are some books that you will take away from you? And even though it's in their very first class, people will say, you know, I was really the Pedagogy of the Oppressed was a very instrumental book in changing the way I thought about things. Now that's a classic text. The other thing is, what we're doing with the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola is trying to apply it to this 21st century learning environment online. If you were to go to the spiritual exercises, you'd find much the same kind of thing, and it wouldn't be academic keys. It would be Renaissancese. It would be a language that made sense in 16th century Spain, but doesn't make sense, necessarily to us. Doesn't, evoke the same kinds of things that it did then. So part of the work of all of us as learners is to try to say, okay, this is an important work. How do I translate it into my own experience? And that's going to be, I would think this is probably going to be the hardest book in your whole curriculum. So it's like you're strengthening yourselves, but you're going to do the same thing when you read Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach. You're going to have to say, okay, it's about teaching, but really, how do I make sense of it as a leader? That's interpretive. That's the and after that you'll think, wow, Prairie makes Palmer look like it's nothing. So.
Well, and I think in some ways, Prairie does tee up Parker Palmer. I mean, the idea of a community of learners, and there are a lot of those themes that you can see being lived out in the way that Parker Palmer, although he comes from a Quaker, a different perspective, and then even like I think Adichie's TED Talk about the danger of a single story. Again, there's some more themes. I mean, I think once you start getting a better grasp of Prairie, I feel like you can see him in lots of different places.
Well, even in your own industry, I'm not sure everybody that's on the call what industry they're from or that will watch this later. I know in my course where people are coming from, but I mean, I would be thinking about what are the things within my own industry, even our language, how we talk about things that are not accessible to people at all levels of the organization. So, when we have it's been a long time, right, that I did this, but I jumped into a sociology class at a PhD level, and I did not, other than a 101 sociology class when I was an undergrad, and coming from an education background and jumping into a PhD level of sociology, I was like, I'm gonna flunk, and it was a result of not that I couldn't ultimately understand what they were talking about, not that I wasn't smart enough, completely different language that they were speaking and how they referred to things. And that happens in the business industry, the finance industry, the nonprofit industry, the spiritual industry, name an industry. We have our own languages, and they're not necessarily always accessible to the people that we think that they are. And so I think Prairie's a really great example of that to all of us as well, just in the text.
Great. Thanks for the good question, Albert. Obviously triggered a lot of thoughts. Any other questions, any other observations that anybody wants to make?
Hello, this is Becky Franks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I have really actually enjoyed the book and working in a nonprofit and being able to reach out and try to help people and communities improve health. That's kind of where my brain has been over the last 25 years. One of the things that I thought is completely true that he said was that it is so important to be able to, not come in as the white shining armor, that in and of itself is oppressive. And totally the way he named that was perfect. I loved it. I think what's hard in that I didn't get as much explanation on the how or the backside is it's fairly easy to find people from a community. I work with a very large minority community in Montana, and we can find all kinds of leaders from that community, and yet he talked about the oppressive ways of even the leaders of that community to be able to come forward. But the common folks, for them to be able to see the visual that things could be different, things could be not so poor. Things could be so you could have health care. Things could be, but sometimes getting past that is hard. And it made me want to, reading the book, it made me want to absolutely wave some kind of fairy dust over much of Montana and say, you know what, you could, if it could be different, but they can't even see it. And so then how do you get that so that what he says is true?
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, that's the heart of the question, and it's not just for this class, it's for the whole leadership program is, you know, how do you be a leader when other people don't seem to quite get it? And, you know, I think what this book and what this course and what this curriculum is trying to do is say to you as a leader, you take people where they are, and then you say, you know, given what you know to be the way to proceed, you know what they, you know, where you and they are going to be more whole, to be more fully actualized, to be, you know. Now, that may mean you only get one step ahead after a lot of work, but at least you're moving in the right direction. Other people can come in and maybe actually make it worse. You know, make it so that people get more bogged down in poverty or marginalization and that. So part of your work as a leader is to engage people where they are, and like Prairie, is to try to raise their consciousness, but realize that that raising of the consciousness is not going to be something where they suddenly are going to see it just like you see it, that, or they go, oh, I hadn't even thought of it that way. It's that what you're doing is you're engaging them to try to get them to do their own work, their own journey, to get to their next place in their own development as a person. And that's where letting go of what you expect them to think, expect them to do is very important. And you learn from Prairie is that the thing that you owe to them is to help them in their journey. And that journey is a journey of consciousness as well as a journey of development.
And also, yeah, I mean, I would say also an acknowledgement that journey is mutual. I mean, Prairie says it's only the oppressed who, by freeing themselves, can free their oppressors. So how do we be a part of a mutual or eye-level relationship with people, not just feeling like it's going to go one way in that way? I think that your question, Becky, is perfect, and I think that is at the heart of leadership. If it was easy, we would have figured out how to do it already, right? And so now it becomes the hard, complex, adaptive work of what leaders will do, and how do you turn the heat up enough to help people become the change that they want to become and be a part of that process with them, but giving that work back to them in different ways. And wouldn't it be great if, like, Prairie gave us a roadmap about how that would fit in different contexts? But yeah, I think that's the work that we have to figure out.
I think, you know, on my end, the piece of like getting to know people, and Josh's work in Zambia, I mean, he already talked about, okay, so we went in, we did some training with them, we got to know them, we're learning from one another, and then it somewhat naturally happened. I think sometimes you kind of luck out as a leader, and that emerges, right, just by the nature of being open to, we have this ebb and flow relationship, we're getting eye level, we're creating an environment, we're setting the stage, and people flourish under that. The frustration, I think, for leaders is when they think they're doing the setting the stage, they're creating the environment, they're engaging in, you know, trying to allow people to have room to grow and flourish themselves, and it doesn't feel like people are taking the opportunity. And then I think the hard work is to reflect back and really figure out, am I doing as a leader all I can in the way that they need it to set that stage, and or am I the right person, and do I need to tap some other people to come in and help create that environment for this community or for this group? You know, I mean, I think it's often why a lot of organizations, when they're struggling with some of those things, will bring somebody that is not super close to them in from the outside to help create some of that space. So I think, I mean, again, I hear your frustration. It's one of those things where we want it to, if we feel like we're doing the work, we want it to kind of happen quicker. And I do think that really good leadership and relaying a foundation when something has been not there for a very long time takes a very long time to build that up. I mean, Josh, how long have you been going to Zambia?
It's our 11th year being in that community.
And again, things probably are very different. I could be wrong. 11th year in with what you know, how you go about things, how you do things, and so you see things. Maybe some things progress much faster than they used to, and some things might still be like, oh, we still need to work on that. And you take a new group of students every year, but.
We might have time for more, maybe, or
10 more minutes at the most. Hopefully, Becky, that was good. One thing I would just, and this, I don't know if this helps or takes you back even further, is I remember Dorothy Day was the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and what they used to do is feed people in 4 sections of urban environments. But one of the other things they did was they protested stuff. They protested nukes. They protested arms races. I mean, it's back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And somebody said, you know, you're doing all this protesting, but nothing's going to change. You know, it's not going to make any difference. And she says, you know, my call is not to be successful. My call is to be faithful. And I think that's a call not just to a religious person or a spiritual person, but to a leader. My call is not to be, I stay in this not because I see success. I stay in it because that's what my role is. I need to be doing this. I can only do this. I cannot do something else. Anyway, that may even be more depressing, but at least, I mean, I think it is a part of what we understand as leadership, is sometimes you do it despite the fact that things don't ever seem to be shifting. So we have about 8 minutes. I do not want to, Janet asked who said that. That's Dorothy Day, who is the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement in New York, very famous. When Pope Francis came to the United States, what was that, 1.5 years ago or something, he mentioned a number of Americans in his speech, and Dorothy Day was one of them. Thomas Merton was the other one, who was also a very key person for us. Well, just so we don't go over time, I'm going to say we'll kind of bring this to a close now. We'll have a recording of this, but you can now go back into your discussion boards on both Dr. Armstrong and Dr. Ash's sites. And even though other people in the class may not have been a part of this webinar, we'll make it available to them in a recording. But don't let that stop you from talking about some of the ideas that maybe got triggered as we all were talking about Prairie, or about how to fit that into leadership. So take this back to your discussion boards, continue to think about it. The 3 of us desperately want you to wake up in the middle of the night with a terribly deep thought and not be able to go back to sleep. That would be like, wow, we've done our job. You know, our work is done now. So hopefully you'll be able to do that. Let's see, and thank you, Alberto, for that comment as well. And I will also try to connect up if we have an opportunity. Maybe Samantha and Josh and I can have another go at this later on in the session. Thank you all for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your evening or afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just thankful for so many of the students who I see your names here that are in my class, and thanks for joining us, and look forward to actually seeing you at another event like this. So
And again, sorry I was late, but I'm glad I was able to jump in, and really excited to see where this takes us on the discussion boards and in some of the future assignments, and confident that people will be able to get there.
Good, good. So take care, everyone. I'll send the recording to Josh and Sam, and they can post it in your Blackboard site probably in about a week.
Yep.
All right, take care.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.